My sister stood on stage, accepting the Innovator of the Year award for the algorithm I wrote. The crowd gave her a standing ovation. I stood up with them, a perfect smile plastered on my face, and while I clapped for her, I pulled out my phone and unleashed the one file that would burn her entire career to the ground. She just didn't know it yet. The air in the ballroom tasted like champagne and ambition. It was the annual Tech Vanguard Gala, a place where people wore $1,000 shoes to walk on marble floors and traded business cards that were essentially tickets to the future. Everything glittered. The chandeliers dripped crystals like frozen rain. The ice sculptures were lit from within by soft blue LEDs, and the sequins on the gowns of venture capitalists' wives caught the light and threw it back, blinding you for a second. I felt completely out of place in my simple navy blue dress, the one I'd bought on sale for moments just like this, moments where I was required to be present, but not seen. My sister, Madison, was definitely seen. She was a supernova in a silver dress that looked like it had been woven from moonlight and stock options. She stood at the podium, one hand clutching the heavy geometric award, the other gesturing gracefully as she spoke. Her voice, practiced and smooth, filled the cavernous room. "I am just so humbled," she said, a perfect telegenic tear tracing a path down her cheek. "This project, Tara, wasn't just code. It was a dream." My parents, Richard and Eleanor, sat at the head table, looking up at her with a kind of reverent adoration, usually reserved for religious figures. My father's eyes were misty, my mother's smile so wide it looked like it hurt. They were the proud parents of a genius, a visionary, and I was their other daughter, Chloe, the one who was so good with computers, the one who worked behind the scenes. I watched them from my seat at table 42, tucked away near the kitchens, a spot reserved for low-level engineers and +1s. No one at my table knew who I was. They were busy talking about server latency and the latest Series B funding rounds. I just sipped my water, the condensation cold against my fingers, and felt that old familiar ache settle in my chest. It wasn't sharp anymore. After years of this, it was a dull, constant pressure, like a stone I carried in my ribs. Terra wasn't just a dream. It was my dissertation, my obsession, my life for the past 4 years. It was an AI-driven agricultural algorithm designed to predict crop yields with over 98% accuracy, factoring in everything from soil composition to hyperlocal weather patterns. It was revolutionary. It was also entirely, 100%, mine. I wrote every single one of its 1.2 million lines of code. The name, the concept, the architecture, all of it was born during sleepless nights in my tiny apartment, fueled by cheap coffee and a desperate need to build something that mattered. Madison's contribution? She designed the logo, a sleek green leaf cradled by a circuit board, and she was a fantastic presenter. She could sell ice in the Arctic. When I'd finished the beta version, I was struggling to get anyone to even look at it. I was an unknown programmer. Madison, with her business degree and her magnetic personality, had offered to help. "Let me be the face of it, Chloe," she'd said, her voice like honey. "You hate the spotlight. I can get this in front of the right people. We'll be a team." I was hesitant, but my parents had pushed. "It's a perfect partnership," my father had declared. "The brains and the beauty. You two will be unstoppable." So I agreed. I thought we were a team. I was the architect. She was the ambassador. But somewhere along the line, the story changed. We became I, and my role was slowly, methodically erased. It started small. In interviews, she'd say, "When I developed the initial framework," or "My vision for Terra was..." At family dinners, my parents would gush, "Madison, tell Aunt Carol about the breakthrough you had with the predictive modeling." If I tried to interject, to gently correct the narrative, well, actually, that was the part I spent 6 months coding. My mother would pat my hand and say, "Don't be modest, Chloe. Everyone knows you helped. Madison is just better at explaining it." They didn't see it as theft. They saw it as branding. And Madison was the better brand. Tonight was the culmination of that slow, painful erasure. On stage, Madison was weaving a beautiful fiction. "I remember the moment the idea struck me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was looking at a struggling community garden in my neighborhood, and I just thought, technology has to be able to help. We have to be able to do better." The crowd was mesmerized. I felt a cold wave of nausea. A community garden? The idea came to me from a dense academic paper on algorithmic farming I'd found in a university archive. I had never even been to her neighborhood. She was not just taking credit. She was stealing my story, my why. She was replacing my 4 years of brutal, solitary work with a folksy, marketable anecdote. And my parents were drinking it in, their faces shining with pride for the daughter they had invented. For the daughter who was so much easier to celebrate than the quiet, complicated one who actually did the work. That's when the dull ache in my chest finally sharpened into something else. Not anger, not sadness. It was clarity. A cold, hard, diamond-like clarity. They were never going to see me. They were never going to acknowledge what I had done. In their story, I was a footnote, a helpful assistant, the quiet girl who was good with computers. So I smiled. I stood. I applauded my sister's beautiful, magnificent lie. And as the room thundered with applause, I opened a private repository on my phone. Inside was a folder named Failsafe. It contained everything. The original time-stamped code, commits from 4 years ago. My detailed development logs. Scans of my handwritten notes. Video diaries I'd made. Talking to the camera as I worked through complex problems. My face pale with exhaustion, but my eyes bright with discovery. And a 200-page document, my original thesis, detailing the entire project, its genesis, its theory, its execution. My name was on every page. With a single tap, I changed the repository's status from private to public. Then, I copied the link. I opened Twitter. I tagged the Tech Vanguard Awards, the 2 biggest tech journalists in the room, and the top 3 venture capital firms that had been courting Madison for funding. And I wrote a simple, devastating sentence. "So proud of my sister Madison for her award tonight. For anyone interested in the technical origins of the Terra project, you can find the complete time-stamped development history here." I hit post. The applause was starting to die down. Madison was blowing kisses to the crowd, her eyes finding mine for a split second. She gave me a tiny condescending wink, as if to say, "See? This is how it's done." I just smiled back, a real smile this time, and took a long, slow sip of my water. The stone in my ribs felt a little lighter. The show was over. But the story was just beginning. The walk from table 42 to the valet stand felt like crossing a different planet. The buzz in the room was still electric, but now it felt fragile. My phone, which I'd put on silent, was vibrating non-stop in my clutch, a frantic, angry hornet. I didn't look at it. I just kept walking, my cheap heels clicking on the marble. I could feel a few pairs of eyes on me. A man who I recognized as a prominent tech blogger was staring down at his phone, his eyebrows raised in astonishment. Then he looked up and met my gaze. He knew. As I handed my ticket to the valet, the cold night air felt like a blessing, washing away the recycled, champagne-scented atmosphere of the gala. I leaned against a stone pillar and finally looked at my phone. The screen was a chaotic explosion of notifications. My tweet had been retweeted over 1,000 times in less than 10 minutes. The link to my repository was being passed around the tech community like a secret weapon. My mentions were a war zone of confusion, disbelief, and a growing wave of support from anonymous programmers who recognized the language of my code, the authenticity of my logs. Then came the texts from my family. The first was from my mother. "Chloe, what is this? People are asking me things. Take it down now." The second was from my father. "This is incredibly inappropriate. You are embarrassing your sister on her big night. We will discuss your behavior at home." The third was from Madison. It was just one word. "You." Followed by another text a second later. "You will regret this for the rest of your life." I felt a tremor in my hands, but it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. For the first time, I wasn't the one being silenced. I was the one who had dropped the bomb. My car, a sensible 10-year-old sedan, pulled up, looking shabby and out of place next to the Teslas and Porsches. As I got in, I saw my parents and Madison rushing out of the main doors. My mother was frantically scanning the line of cars. Madison's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Her silver dress no longer looked ethereal. It looked like armor. I didn't wait. I drove away, the city lights blurring into long streaks of color through my windshield. The phone kept buzzing, a relentless, desperate plea for me to undo what I had done. But there was no going back. This wasn't a sudden, impulsive act of rebellion. It was the final, logical step in a lifetime of being sidelined. This wasn't just about the Terra Project. This was about everything. I started thinking about the first time I realized the rules were different for me. I was in 7th grade. Madison was in 9th. We both entered the district science fair. My project was a functioning miniature water filtration system I had built out of PVC pipes, sand, and charcoal. It was clunky and ugly, but it worked. I'd spent weeks researching and building it in the garage. Madison's project was a beautiful, professionally printed triptych board about the life cycle of a butterfly. She'd spent one afternoon on it, mostly cutting out pictures from a magazine. I won 2nd place. Madison won 1st. When I asked my dad why, he'd put his arm around my shoulder. "Honey, your project was brilliant, really." But Madison's was just more polished. Presentation matters. Later, I overheard my mother on the phone with my aunt. "Chloe is so bright, almost too bright for her own good. But Madison, she just has that star quality. She knows how to win." That became the theme of our childhood. I was the brilliant one who did the work. She was the star who got the credit. Every time, there was a justification. When she used my history essay as inspiration for her own, and got a better grade, it was because her writing is more persuasive. When she took my idea for a student council campaign and ran with it, it was because she's a natural leader. My parents weren't malicious. They just had a blind spot the size of a planet. They saw my quiet, focused intensity as a liability, and Madison's effortless charm as an asset. They encouraged me to help her, to be the wind beneath her wings, never realizing that my own wings were being systematically clipped. The fail-safe folder wasn't created out of spite. It was created out of self-preservation. About a year into the Terra Project, when Madison started referring to it as my company in casual conversation, a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. I remembered the science fair, the history essay, the student council campaign. I realized I was building the most important thing in my life on a foundation of trust that had been proven, time and again, to be worthless. So I started documenting everything. I began the video logs, talking through my process, time-stamping my breakthroughs. I made meticulous dated notes in physical notebooks. I ensured every line of code I committed to our private server was also committed to my own secret offline server, with an immutable timestamp. I felt paranoid, like I was preparing for a war I hoped would never come. I told myself it was just for my own records, a way to keep track of my intellectual property. But deep down I knew what I was doing. I was building an ark. I was preparing for the flood. Tonight, the flood had come. Driving through the empty streets, the city a sleeping giant around me, I finally understood. My parents didn't want a team. They wanted a star. And they were willing to sacrifice one daughter to create another. My help wasn't a contribution. It was a resource to be consumed. My brilliance wasn't something to be celebrated. It was raw material for Madison's success. The vibrating on the passenger seat finally stopped. A moment of blessed silence. Then, a new notification lit up the screen. It was an email. The subject line read, Terra Project Origins? It was from Kara Swisher, one of the most respected tech journalists in the world. The body of the email was short. Your repository is compelling. I have some questions. Are you free to talk? I pulled over to the side of the road, the engine humming quietly. The city lights reflected in my eyes. They had wanted me to be invisible, but I had just made myself the most visible person in their entire world. I took a deep breath, my fingers steady as I typed out my reply. Yes, I wrote. I am. The silence from my family lasted exactly 8 hours. It was a heavy, loaded silence, the kind that precedes a storm. I spent the night at a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, not wanting to go back to my apartment, which was technically owned by the LLC Madison had set up for our company. I lay on top of the stiff, scratchy comforter, staring at the ceiling and watching the story unfold online. The tech world had erupted. My repository was the #1 topic on Hacker News. Programmers were dissecting my code, praising its elegance and complexity. Bloggers were putting my video logs side by side with Madison's televised interviews, creating damning timelines that showed her talking about breakthroughs, weeks after I had documented them myself. The narrative was shifting with breathtaking speed. I wasn't an angry, jealous sister anymore. I was a brilliant coder who had been systematically erased. The hashtag #GiveChloe was trending. The confrontation came just after sunrise. My father called. His voice was different. The patronizing disappointment was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp fury. "You have 5 minutes to get to the house," he said. Not a request. "We are fixing this. Now." "There's nothing to fix," I replied, my own voice surprisingly calm. "The truth is out." "The truth?" he scoffed, the sound crackling over the line. "You have destroyed this family for a bit of attention, Chloe. Madison is a wreck. Your mother hasn't stopped crying. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I know exactly what I've done," I said, and hung up. But I knew I had to face them. Not to fix it, but to end it. I drove to my childhood home, the sprawling suburban house that had always felt more like Madison's museum than my home. Every wall was covered with photos of her. Madison winning a track medal, Madison crowned prom queen, Madison graduating with honors. There was one small framed photo of me from college, tucked away on a bookshelf in the den. They were all waiting in the living room, a grim tribunal. Madison was curled on the sofa, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, her face pale and swollen from crying. She looked genuinely broken. For a moment, a pang of guilt hit me, an old, conditioned reflex. My mother was next to her, stroking her hair, glaring at me as if I were an intruder. My father stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed, his face a thundercloud. "Right," he began, his voice dangerously low. "Here's what's going to happen. You are going to release a statement. You're going to say you were confused, that you felt left out, and that in a moment of emotional distress, you misrepresented your role in the project. You will call it a profound misunderstanding arising from a deeply collaborative process." I stared at him incredulous. "You want me to lie?" "I want you to save this family," he roared, taking a step forward. "Madison has a board meeting this afternoon. Our investors are panicking. Her entire future, our entire future, is on the line because you decided to throw a temper tantrum on the internet." "My temper tantrum?" I said, my voice rising, the years of suppressed frustration finally boiling over. "I spent 4 years of my life, Dad, 16 hours a day, sleeping at my desk, missing holidays, birthdays, everything, to build Tara. Not Madison. Me. And you watched. You all watched as she took every ounce of credit, as she built her entire identity on my work. And you called it good branding. You didn't just let it happen. You encouraged it. You told me to be a team player while she was stealing my life's work right in front of you. That is not what happened," my mother cried out, jumping to her feet. "Madison has always been the visionary. You were the technical support. It's a symbiotic relationship. She couldn't have done it without you, and you certainly couldn't have done it without her. You don't have the people skills, Chloe. You've always been difficult. That was the word they always used. Difficult because I preferred books to parties. Difficult because I didn't perform for an audience. Difficult because I saw the world in lines of code instead of photo ops. I turned to Madison. She wouldn't look at me. "Say something," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "Just tell them. Tell them the truth." Madison finally looked up, her eyes filled with a venom I had never seen before. "The truth?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "The truth is that you're a bitter, jealous nobody. You gave me the code, Chloe. You were happy to stay in the background until you saw me succeeding. You couldn't handle it. You couldn't handle seeing me shine, and that was it. The final killing blow. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a blind spot. It was a choice. They had chosen their star, and they would protect her at any cost, even if it meant annihilating me. The guilt I'd felt moments before evaporated, replaced by a profound, chilling certainty. "Okay," I said quietly. The room fell silent. "I see now." I turned and walked towards the door. "Where do you think you're going?" my father demanded. "We are not finished here." I paused with my hand on the doorknob and looked back at the three of them. A perfect, tragic portrait of delusion. "Oh, yes, we are," I said. "We've been finished for a long time. I just didn't realize it until now." I walked out, shutting the door softly behind me. I didn't slam it. It didn't need a dramatic sound effect. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. I got in my car, and as I drove away from that house for the last time, I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. The family I thought I had, the one I had tried so desperately to earn a place in, had never really existed at all. The days that followed were a blur of legal consultations, media requests, and frantic, desperate messages from what was once my family. They tried everything. First came the lawyers with a cease and desist letter that was laughably weak. My repository contained only my own work and factual data. There was no libel, no slander, just an immutable chain of evidence. My new lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Anya, glanced at it for 30 seconds and called it digital saber-rattling. Then came the emotional appeals. My mother left long, rambling voicemails, oscillating between tearful pleading, "We can fix this, honey. We just need to present a united front," and bitter accusations. "You have no idea the damage you've caused. Your father's reputation is in tatters." Aunt Carol, who hadn't called me in 5 years, suddenly became a family mediator, urging me to be the bigger person and think about what your grandmother would want. It was a coordinated campaign of guilt, designed to pull me back into the fold, back into my designated role as the quiet, accommodating one. But the strings had been cut. Their words were just noise now. The real consequences were happening in the world outside their living room. The board of directors for Terra Inc. forced Madison to take an indefinite leave of absence. The article by Kara Swisher came out, a meticulously researched piece that laid out the timeline of Terra's development, citing my logs and video diaries as primary sources. It didn't paint me as a hero, or Madison as a villain. It just presented the facts. But the facts were enough. The story went viral. Madison became a symbol of tech world fraud, a cautionary tale of style over substance. Investors pulled their funding. The company we had built, the company I had built, was in a death spiral. I watched it happen with a strange sense of detachment. It felt like watching a building I had designed and constructed be demolished because its foundation was rotten. It was heartbreaking, but it was also necessary. You can't fix a rotten foundation. You have to tear it down and start over. Starting over was terrifying and liberating. I was getting emails not just from journalists, but from the heads of R&D at major tech firms, from prestigious university labs, from agricultural giants. They didn't see the family drama. They saw the code. They saw the mind that had built Terra. They saw me. For the first time, I was being judged on the merit of my work, not on my ability to fit into a narrative someone else had written for me. About 3 weeks after the gala, a final desperate message came through. It was an email from my father. The subject was a proposal. Inside there was no apology, no admission of guilt. It was a business proposition. He proposed they would publicly acknowledge me as the co-creator of Terra. Madison would issue a statement praising my foundational technical contributions. In exchange, I would sign an NDA, turn over all my original documentation, and agree to a joint venture to salvage the company, with Madison remaining as CEO. They weren't offering me justice. They were offering me a promotion, from invisible employee to junior partner in their lie. I stared at the email for a long time. Part of me, the old scared Chloe, whispered that this was the best I was going to get. A compromise, a way to avoid total war. But then I looked around my new tiny apartment, a place I was paying for, with the advance from a consulting contract I just signed. I thought of the emails from people who were inspired by my story, who had felt invisible in their own lives. And I thought of the cold, dead feeling in my chest that night at the gala. I didn't reply to the email. I just forwarded it to Anya with a single note. For the file. Then I closed my laptop. I put on my running shoes and went for a long run, breathing in the cold, clean air. I was running away from nothing. For the first time in my life, I was just running. The lesson in all of this came to me slowly, not as a sudden epiphany, but as a quiet, growing realization. The fight wasn't about getting credit for Terra. It was about reclaiming my own reality. For years, I had allowed my family to define my worth. I had accepted their version of events, where I was the supporting cast in Madison's blockbuster film. I had worked harder, stayed quieter, and made myself smaller, hoping that one day they would finally turn around and see the real me. But that was the trap. You cannot earn validation from people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You cannot win a game that is rigged against you. The only winning move is not to play. The moment I hit post on that tweet, I wasn't just exposing Madison's lie. I was resigning from a role I had never auditioned for. The role of the difficult one, the supporting one, the behind-the-scenes one. My life isn't perfect now. It's messy and uncertain. I lost my family. I lost the company I poured my soul into. There are days when a profound sadness washes over me. A grief for the family I wish I had. There are trolls online who still call me a backstabbing snake. But the difference is, the quiet in my life now is peace, not silence. It's the space I need to build something new, something that is entirely my own on a foundation of truth. I learned that your voice is your most valuable asset, and letting someone else speak for you is a slow form of suicide. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from the people who refuse to see you. They didn't lose a difficult daughter. They lost the architect of their entire success. The price of their comfort was my truth, and I finally decided it was a price I was no longer willing to pay. My work, my ideas, my story, they are mine, and they are not for sale. So that's my story. It's still unfolding, and honestly, I'm still figuring out who I am without the shadow of my family hanging over me. But I wanted to share it, because I know there are so many people out there who feel invisible, whose contributions are overlooked, who are told to be team players while their spirit is being chipped away. If you're one of them, know this: your work matters, your voice matters, and you don't need anyone else's permission to claim your own story. Thank you so much for listening to mine. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to follow my journey as I start building my next big thing, feel free to subscribe. It's a powerful feeling, knowing you're not alone.